On December the 18th, the Fascist Association of War Widows and War Mothers staged a nationwide pledge of support for Mussolini's war. The Italian people joined together in a sacrifice of gold for the honor of Italy. Queen Elena led the women of Rome up to the altar of the nation.
Il nostro saluto alle gloriose bandiere, agli ufficiali e soldati di terra, di mare, dell'aria, alle camicie nere, agli operai, agli ascari fedeli. Buon Natale!
The sacrifice was Italy's symbolic answer to the League of Nations and its feeble economic sanctions. Firm action by the European powers at the League could have stopped Mussolini's war in Ethiopia. Sanctions merely united the Italian people behind the Duce and his war. 250,000 Romans came to sacrifice their gold wedding rings in a crucible smoldering with incense. In return, the state gave them a ring of iron. Italy's women now belonged to Mussolini.
Buon Natale a tutti! Un cazzo anche per noi! Una bella festa! Bene, grazie, buon Natale! Buon Natale. Giovanni, buon Natale!
A week later, the Italian Expeditionary Force celebrated Christmas under the African sun and under a new commander-in-chief, Marshal Pietro Badoglio. Mussolini had finally lost patience with De Bono's dithering and replaced him with a more ruthless leader. The brutal Badoglio was to take the war into a new and crueler phase. Chianti bottles from the Christmas cactus brought the festive spirit to Italy's lonely soldiers camped in a dry land. As the presents were passed around, the bombing of Ethiopia intensified. There were also Christmas presents for the people of Ethiopia, to be flown in by the 103rd Squadron, special delivery to Dessie, Haile Selassie's new headquarters, north of Addis Ababa on the edge of the battle zone.
Questa bomba farà tempo, vedrai che macello. Ecco, 70-80 cadaveri, vedrai che... Avanzate da nord-ovest, non abbassate di troppo sul ghiacciaio. Abbiamo già colpito una reclama.
Indietro! Indietro! Volete da lì! Bocca al lupo, eh!
The Red Cross flag no longer protected the Ethiopians. The Emperor's presence in Dessie attracted attack. When the Christmas bombs stopped falling, Haile Selassie inspected the remains of Dessie's Red Cross hospital. It had been hit by 40 bombs. Badoglio had turned to poison gas and the bombing of civilian targets to speed up his civilizing mission. He wanted no awkward European witnesses from the International Red Cross to see the victims of bombing raids and the flesh blistered by gas. But the Red Cross volunteers, British, Swedish, Egyptian, remained. Ethiopian casualties were heavy, but the Emperor's chiefs marched to counterattack. The old warlord Ras Mulugeta marched north. Ras Kassa and Ras Seyum menaced Makale from mountain strongholds. And Ras Imru attacked on the western flank. Badoglio was determined to wipe them out, one by one. He would stop at nothing. The Ethiopian peasant warriors marched slowly north with their wives and a few days' supplies. They fought fiercely, fearlessly, in the only way they knew. Each day at dusk they would withdraw from battle, and they never fought on Sundays. But Haile Selassie knew their best chance of victory lay in guerrilla warfare. Be cunning, be fierce, he told his warriors. Do not mass together. Do not wear light-colored clothes. Stay hidden. Strike suddenly. Only the shrewd Ras Imru followed his emperor's advice. His men raided convoys in Italian-held territory, harassed road gangs, seized guns and ammunition, wrecked enemy morale. In the new year, Badoglio's Eritrean corps moved against Ras Kassa and Ras Seyum in Tigray. The Italian mechanized columns could not move quickly in the wild mountains of Tigray, where mules proved more mobile than trucks. Marshal Badoglio knew his troops were not equipped to fight a guerrilla war. His strategy was to lure the Ethiopians into open battle.
L'artiglieria è stata perfetta.
Superior radio communications were critical to Badoglio's strategy. Orders were transmitted fast as news of enemy movements was received. The Askaris marched into the hills to surround Ras Seyum's army in a pincer movement. Ras Seyum's army was destroyed in Tigray. Prisoners were herded into camps. Irreplaceable weapons were lost. Without modern arms, the Ethiopians' courage was tragically futile. Many of the prisoners had lost brothers on the battlefield, killed as they tried to tear the guns from the enemy's hands. Now they have lost their guns and their honor in the humiliation of capture.
Metteteli tutti in riga. Su, avanti, avanti. Di qua, tutti in fila. Su, forza. Avanti. Bene, così, avanti. Tutti in fila.
The Regia Aeronautica ruled the skies unchallenged. Reconnaissance aircraft patrolled all day, mapping the land and looking for the white cotton shamas which betrayed the enemy. Bombers terrorized towns, villages, and marching columns with almost complete impunity. Italy's air power decided the war. Anti-aircraft guns in Ethiopia was the Emperor's Oerlikon, mounted on a rock terrace outside a bomb-proof cave in the hills near Dessie. The cave had become his headquarters after constant bomb attacks had driven him from the town. Too few planes were shot down to interrupt the bombing raids. The terror in the air continued. Civilians moved out of their villages into the hills. They dug caves in the hillside where the bombs would not find them. When marching columns were caught by aircraft in the mountain passes, they were easy targets for the Regia's bombs, guns, and gas. Disparata Squadron's number 1 returns to base, piloted by Mussolini's son-in-law, the Minister of Propaganda, Count Galeazzo Ciano. The tide of war had turned against Haile Selassie. He drove north to the front to consult his commanders and rally the dejected troops. Some warriors responded to their emperor's call and went back to battle, but it was too late. Badoglio had banned the foreign press from the front line. Now he invites them to witness the war's decisive battle, the attack on Amba Aradam, mountain fortress of Ras Mulugeta. If Ras Mulugeta's army of 80,000 could be crushed, only the emperor would stand between the Italians and Addis Ababa. Aerial surveys revealed Ras Mulugeta's weak point. The Italian attack would come from the south. A 9-day siege began. The Italians closed in under a cover of night and cloud. When the morning winds blew the cloud away around Amba Aradam, the Ethiopians saw the Italian army marching up the slopes towards them. Ras Mulugeta's drums beat the alarm. For days, the mountain fortress had been bombarded by aircraft and artillery. Ras Mulugeta just sat, bewildered and shell-shocked in his cave, incapable of action. Amba Aradam was taken. The road south was open. 6,000 Ethiopians had died on Amba Aradam. 15,000 were killed in the next 3 days, cut down by the Regia Aeronauticas machine guns or burned alive by mustard gas. One of the dead was Ras Mulugeta's own son, killed in command of the rear guard. When Ras Mulugeta turned back to mourn over the body, he too was killed by a bullet from the sky. Ethiopian resistance was falling apart. The surviving armies retreated south, demoralized and sick, carrying their wounded and mourning their dead. Ras Imru's army was destroyed in the Battle of Shireh. Ras Kassa and Ras Seyum were now utterly defeated in Tembien. When they reached their emperor, they had no troops left. Finally, in the last desperate battle, the emperor's own forces were massacred at Lake Ashangi. The war was lost. European governments were deaf to Ethiopia's appeals. Africa was too remote. But foreign sympathizers sent medical supplies. Some even joined the International Red Cross effort in Ethiopia to work in makeshift field hospitals, as ill-equipped and vulnerable as the Ethiopian army. The Black Shirt Army was on the last stage of the march of conquest to the old Ethiopian capital of Gondar. For the glory of the fascist party, Secretary General Achille Starace marched behind the Roman standard along a route known to be free of enemy troops into a town untouched by war. The population didn't realize the colonial invader had come to stay. The population didn't realize the colonial invader had come to stay. Beaten in the last battle, abandoned by the League of Nations, the emperor had retreated through deserted towns and villages towards Addis Ababa. Though the Italians were closing in behind him, he stopped for 2 days to fast and pray on his knees in the monolithic church of Lalibela. Haile Selassie planned to move to the hills and fight a guerrilla campaign, but his chiefs and advisors knew their broken armies could not fight on. They persuaded the emperor to leave Ethiopia. On May the 2nd, the imperial family left by train for Djibouti, en route for Palestine, and exile in London. The emperor was leaving a poisoned landscape, turning yellow under an invisible rain of mustard gas sprayed from aircraft. Spraying the mountainsides flanking his columns had eased Badoglio's advance. Where the gas touched flesh, blisters broke out. Barefoot warriors were very vulnerable as they marched over the poisoned land. The falling gas burned their shoulders and left many blind. The fumes burned lungs. People died from drinking poisoned water. The horrified Red Cross volunteers were not equipped to treat gas burns. Mustard gas was outlawed by international agreement after World War I. Mussolini authorized its widespread use to bring about the quick victory which would justify his huge investment in the war. Italian engineers built the roads to victory through the Ethiopian Empire. They were worthy successors to the road builders of ancient Rome. At night, air attacks were suspended, but work on the ground was ceaseless. Urgency increased as the rainy season came nearer, threatening to halt the advance of the heavy mechanized columns. Badoglio knew mud could defeat him where guns had failed. He had to reach Addis Ababa before the rains. The defeated empire lay in ruins. Smoke rose from burned villages in the valleys, carrying the scent of victory up to Badoglio's advancing column. The bombs of the Regia Aeronautica had blasted a safe passage for the trucks, moving relentlessly towards Addis Ababa. The last traces of resistance were hunted down and destroyed. There was no refuge for Ethiopia's beaten warriors. No one was safe from attack, not even the wounded. The march of the Iron Will set out from Dessie on the final stage of Badoglio's drive to victory. For 10 days, the most powerful mechanized column Africa had ever seen rumbled remorselessly along Ethiopia's imperial highway towards Addis Ababa. There were nearly 2,000 vehicles, 11 batteries of artillery, and a squadron of light tanks. They met no resistance. The Askaris were sent ahead to enter Addis Ababa. When they were sure the city was safe, they withdrew, as Mussolini had ordered, to allow Badoglio to lead the Italian troops in triumph towards the imperial arch. 3 days after Haile Selassie's flight from his beaten empire, Badoglio drove into Addis Ababa. The rainy season was setting in, just a few days too late to save the empire. Badoglio's victory was complete. He had defeated the emperor in battle and won the war's greatest prize, Addis Ababa. The fiercely defended city of Harar fell to General Graziani's southern army. The occupation of Ethiopia had begun. At 6 o'clock, the time ordained by Mussolini, the sound of church bells and factory sirens summoned the citizens of Rome to the Duce's headquarters in the Piazza Venezia. News of victory had reached Rome, and the people flocked to pay homage to the victorious leader. They had good reason to rejoice. Their soldiers had conquered the promised land, and it had been a short war. The tame press had shielded them from the uncomfortable truths which could spoil their pride in victory. Mussolini could also rejoice, with good reason. He had won 2 wars. The Ethiopians were beaten, and the Italian people were united in unconditional surrender to the fascist state. At 7:30, the Duce appeared on the balcony of the Palazzo Venezia and addressed Rome.
Uomini e donne di tutta Italia, italiani e amici dell'Italia, al di là dei monti e al di là dei mari, ascoltate il maresciallo Badoglio telegrafa. Oggi, 5 maggio, alle ore 16, alla testa delle truppe vittoriose, sono entrato in Addis Abeba. Annuncio al popolo italiano e al mondo che la guerra è è finita! Annuncio al popolo italiano e al mondo che la pace è ristabilita. Non è senza emozione che io aggiunga che si tratta della nostra pace, della pace romana, che si esprime in questo semplice, irrevocabile, definitiva proposizione: l'Etiopia è italiana!
From the balcony of Haile Selassie's old palace, Marshal Badoglio watched the Italian flag being raised over Addis Ababa with colorless formality. The victorious Italian army took possession of Ethiopia's defeated capital. This was the prize at the end of a 7-month campaign, the place in the sun Mussolini had promised. The city they saw was shattered and burned. Every sign of European ownership had been smashed before their arrival. The victorious march of the Iron Will arrived in the center of Ethiopia's ancient empire to find an ugly ruin. The poor and broken city fell far short of their dreams of victory. The Addis Ababa the Italians had won was not the one the emperor had left. All order left with him. The city was a shell, wrecked and looted by its population. There was little left for the conquerors to occupy, as the foreign legations emerged from their barricaded compounds to welcome the Italians. Slowly, the European population drifted back to the city from the hills. The Ethiopians watched quietly. 275,000 had died in a barbarous war. The European powers accepted the destruction of Ethiopia. They believed peace had returned to the world. Hitler had watched closely as the seeds of World War II were sown. The exiled emperor of Ethiopia continued his campaign for justice in Europe. A new empire prepared to announce its creation.
segnato il destino dell'Etiopia oggi, 9 maggio, 14° anno dell'era fascista.